The rooftop of Harlow Enterprises gleamed under the late afternoon sun, its glass and steel helipad catching the light like a crown on the corporate giant. A brand new helicopter rested there, sleek and silver, its rotor blades still from the delivery that had happened just hours ago. Employees from the upper floors had been invited to witness the unveiling, and they milled about with glasses of champagne, whispering admiration for their CEO's latest toy. Victoria Harlow thrived in these moments. Tall, striking, with a confidence sharpened by years of privilege, she wore her arrogance like a designer gown. She raised her glass and smiled at the murmurs of approval. "Ladies and gentlemen, this," she gestured at the helicopter with a flourish, "is not just a machine. It is a statement, a symbol of what power, ambition, and success can buy." Her words drew polite laughter, but not everyone was smiling. By the edge of the rooftop, leaning on a mop he hadn't had time to put away, Daniel the janitor watched quietly. He was older than most of the employees, mid-30s perhaps, his uniform plain and unremarkable. He looked as if he belonged anywhere but this glamorous gathering, yet his eyes lingered on the helicopter with a strange familiarity. One of the younger executives, emboldened by champagne, noticed Daniel. "Hey, maybe Daniel should take it for a spin," he called out, earning chuckles from the group. Victoria caught sight of the janitor and smirked, seizing the opportunity for entertainment. "Daniel," she said, her voice laced with mock sweetness, "what do you think of my new helicopter?" He straightened, wiping his hands on his uniform. "It's a fine machine," he said simply. His tone carried no awe, no deference, just a calm certainty that made a few heads turn. Victoria tilted her head. "Oh, and what would you know about machines like this?" "Enough," he replied. The answer was short, but it hung in the air, unexpected. Laughter bubbled up from the crowd again, and Victoria, unwilling to lose control of the moment, leaned into the mockery. "Tell you what," she said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "If you can fly this helicopter without destroying it, I'll marry you myself." The rooftop erupted in laughter. The absurdity of a janitor and a CEO, it was too rich for them to resist. Daniel didn't laugh. He met her gaze with a level calm that unsettled her just slightly. "All right," he said, nodding once. The laughter faltered. A few people coughed nervously, unsure if they had heard correctly. Victoria blinked, her smirk freezing on her lips. "Excuse me, you said if I can fly it, you'll marry me," Daniel repeated, his voice even. "I accept." The air shifted. What had begun as a joke now had the weight of something far more serious. Some of the employees exchanged glances, torn between amusement and disbelief. Victoria forced a laugh, though it rang hollow this time. "You can't be serious," she said, trying to regain the upper hand. "I'm as serious as you are," he answered. For the first time in a long while, Victoria felt a crack in her confidence. She hadn't expected him to call her bluff, hadn't expected those steady eyes to hold hers without flinching. She searched his face for a trace of embarrassment, but there was none. "Fine," she snapped, masking her unease with disdain. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp, we'll see what kind of pilot you are, janitor." Daniel gave a faint smile, not arrogant, not mocking, just knowing. "I'll be here." As he walked away, mop balanced casually on his shoulder, the rooftop buzzed with speculation. Some laughed it off, others whispered that the janitor had lost his mind. But Victoria couldn't shake the strange chill that lingered after his words. For the first time, she wondered if her challenge might cost her more than she had bargained for. The morning broke crisp and clear, the city skyline painted gold by the rising sun. By the time the clock neared 9, a crowd had already gathered on the rooftop helipad of Harlow Enterprises. News of the previous evening's wager had spread like wildfire through the building, and no one wanted to miss the spectacle. Secretaries, executives, even security guards leaned against the railing, phones in hand, ready to capture what they assumed would be the humiliation of a janitor. Victoria arrived in style, stepping from her private elevator in a tailored suit the color of midnight. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she strode to the center of the gathering, every eye following her. She looked radiant, but beneath her polished exterior was a spark of irritation. She had expected Daniel to back down, to laugh it off as a joke and return to mopping floors. Instead, he had doubled down, and the entire office had latched onto it as the event of the week. She scanned the rooftop and spotted him. Daniel stood quietly by the helicopter, already waiting. No suit, no show of bravado, just his plain janitor's uniform, his hands loosely at his sides. There was something maddening about his calmness, as if he wasn't walking into a trap but simply showing up to do a day's work. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria said loudly, her voice carrying above the chatter, welcome to today's entertainment. Our very own janitor believes he can fly this beauty. I hope you all brought your cameras, because this is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime disaster. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Daniel didn't react. He approached the helicopter with measured steps, running his hand lightly over its gleaming surface. To the untrained eye, it looked like idle curiosity. But a few sharp-eyed onlookers noticed the precision in his touch, the way he examined the rotor blades, the fuel intake, the instrument panel through the window. His eyes weren't wandering, they were calculating. Victoria noticed too, though she quickly buried her unease beneath a mocking smile. What are you doing, Daniel? Trying to figure out where the key goes? No, he said evenly, crouching to inspect a landing skid. I'm making sure it's ready. That simple answer sent another ripple through the crowd. Ready? What kind of janitor talked like that? A bold junior executive called out, hey, maybe he used to play helicopter video games. The laughter returned, louder this time, but it didn't reach Daniel. He was inside his own world, running checks with the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Victoria's smirk faltered. The scene wasn't unfolding the way she had planned. She had expected bumbling, nerves, maybe even begging for mercy. Instead, Daniel radiated composure. She tried again to needle him. You realize, of course, that this isn't a broom you can wave around. If you actually start this thing, you could kill yourself. Or worse, damage my helicopter. Daniel straightened and looked at her, his expression unreadable. If I was worried about that, he said softly, I wouldn't be here. The words carried, quiet though they were, silencing the crowd. Victoria opened her mouth to retort but found no quick comeback. For a flicker of a moment, she saw something in his eyes that unsettled her, experience. A hush fell as Daniel climbed into the cockpit. His movements were smooth, efficient. He didn't fumble with the controls or look confused. He strapped himself in, adjusted the seat, and began flipping switches with practiced precision. The low whine of the engine stirred, growing into a rumble as the rotor blades began to spin. Wind whipped across the rooftop, tugging at skirts and ties, forcing people to shield their faces. Excitement and nervousness mingled in the air. Victoria forced a laugh, though it rang thin. Don't worry, everyone, he'll panic the moment those blades start moving. But Daniel didn't panic. He checked his instruments, his hands steady, his gaze focused. To anyone paying attention, it was clear, this wasn't the first time he'd done this. For the first time, the crowd's laughter ebbed into silence. A murmur spread instead, a whisper of doubt, of curiosity. Could he really do it? Victoria folded her arms tightly across her chest, nails digging into her palms. This was supposed to be her victory, her spectacle. Yet as the helicopter's rotors thundered overhead and Daniel sat in the cockpit with complete command, a cold realization crept into her. She might be the one about to be humiliated. The roar of the rotor blades grew until it was nearly deafening, the wind slamming across the rooftop and sending papers flying from the hands of the spectators. The helicopter trembled with energy, eager to break free of the ground. Inside the cockpit, Daniel's face was calm, lit by the glow of the control panel. His hands moved with deliberate precision, adjusting throttle, checking gauges, setting trim. To anyone watching closely, it was no act. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't improvising. He knew exactly what he was doing. On the rooftop, the laughter had long since died away. What had begun as a joke now had a tension that gripped the crowd by the throat. Even Victoria found herself gripping the railing, her mockery lodged in her chest like a stone. She told herself he was bluffing, that he'd choke at the last second. Yet the confidence in his movements told a different story. Then the moment came. The helicopter lifted, first with a shudder, then smoothly, steadily, rising into the morning air. Gasps erupted around the rooftop. A few employees instinctively stepped back, shielding their eyes against the rotor wash. The silver machine rose higher, clearing the edge of the building with effortless grace. Daniel held it steady in a hover, the skyscrapers of the city gleaming around him, the streets far below shrinking into a toy model. For a suspended second, it looked almost surreal, a janitor at the controls of a multi-million-dollar helicopter, perfectly in command. From the crowd, a voice shouted, "He's actually doing it." Another cried, "No way." Phones shot into the air, capturing every second, the employee's earlier mockery now transformed into awe. Daniel eased the cyclic, nudging the nose forward, and the helicopter slid gracefully across the sky. He circled the building once, the machine responding to his touch as if it were an extension of his body. When he banked slightly, the rotors slicing through the sunlight, a collective gasp rose from below. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't reckless. It was artistry. Victoria's nails bit into her palm as she watched, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to fail, to stumble, to confirm her superiority. Instead, with every flawless maneuver, Daniel shredded the image she had built of him, the invisible worker, the nobody janitor. He brought the helicopter into a climb, the city sprawling wider beneath him, then tilted it into a gentle descent. Not content with proving he could lift off, he demonstrated control in every dimension. A slide left, a dip right, a smooth rotation that pivoted the craft on its axis. The employees who had come expecting slapstick disaster now stared, mesmerized, their cheers growing louder with each pass. Inside the cockpit, Daniel's jaw was set, his eyes focused. But there was something else there too, a glimmer of memory, of ghosts from another life. The motions came to him not just from training, but from years of service, missions carried out in silence, lives balanced on the edge of a rotor's hum. For a moment, the rooftop crowd vanished in his mind, replaced by deserts and mountains, by nights where the only light was from tracer fire below. He shook it off, steadying himself in the present, but the weight of it lingered in his gaze. After several minutes in the air, he brought the helicopter back toward the rooftop. The crowd pressed forward, their skepticism completely gone, replaced by eager anticipation. He descended with perfect control, touching down so gently that the skids kissed the helipad without the slightest jolt. Silence fell, the engine whined down, the rotors slowing until the deafening roar softened to a whisper. Daniel unbuckled himself, stepped out, and walked toward the waiting crowd. He didn't bow, didn't gloat, just stood there, calm as ever, as if what he had done were nothing more than sweeping a floor. The silence broke with an explosion of cheers. Some clapped, others whistled, and a few shouted his name like he was a hero. Victoria remained still, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She had no words. She couldn't believe it. Daniel's eyes found hers across the rooftop. He didn't smile, didn't smirk. He only held her gaze for a long, steady moment, and in that look she felt stripped bare, every ounce of her arrogance, her superiority, her shallow pride, laid open for judgment. He had done what she had declared impossible. And now, the weight of her promise, recklessly made, cruelly meant, hung between them, heavier than the helicopter itself. The rooftop had never felt so alive. Employees clustered together, buzzing with excitement, their voices spilling over one another in disbelief. They replayed the moment again and again, the janitor lifting the helicopter like it was second nature, guiding it across the sky with a mastery none of them had expected. A few still held their phones high, capturing Daniel as he stood in the center of it all, the downed rotor blades clicking slowly above him. Victoria remained frozen, her arms crossed tightly, though the gesture no longer carried authority, it was armor against the truth she couldn't ignore. Her employees, once her captive audience, had eyes only for Daniel now. Admiration radiated from them in a way she had never been able to command, no matter how much money she flaunted or how sharply she dressed. Someone near the front called out, "Daniel, where did you learn to do that?" The crowd leaned forward, eager for an answer. Daniel hesitated. For a moment, he looked as if he might deflect, shrug it off as a trick of luck. But then his gaze swept the rooftop, landing finally on Victoria. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a hard line, but her eyes, those sharp, mocking eyes, now held a question she couldn't bring herself to speak. "I used to fly," Daniel said simply, his voice carrying easily in the hush. "Before this job, I served as a pilot in the Air Force. Special operations. Missions I can't talk about. After one too many losses, I walked away. I wanted a quiet life. That's how I ended up here." The revelation hit like a shockwave. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some whispered his words back to each other as if to confirm they'd heard correctly. The janitor they had ignored, laughed at, or dismissed as invisible had once been a decorated pilot, a man who had risked his life in skies far more dangerous than the one he had just conquered. Daniel's expression softened. "I never wanted recognition. I just wanted peace. But sometimes," he added, his eyes narrowing slightly on Victoria, "people mistake quiet for weakness." The crowd's collective gaze shifted toward the CEO, and for the first time in her career, Victoria felt the weight of their judgment pressing against her. She had mocked him publicly, turned him into a spectacle, and now stood exposed as the fool in her own theater. One of the executives murmured, "You promised to marry him," the words, though whispered, carried like thunder. Victoria's throat tightened. She tried to laugh, but it faltered. It was a joke, she said quickly, her voice brittle. No one actually expected. I didn't, Daniel interrupted, his tone calm but firm. All eyes swung back to him. Marriage isn't something to gamble with. I never wanted that. What I wanted, his gaze swept the group again, landing on Victoria last, was respect. Respect for the people you think are beneath you. The people who keep this building standing, who clean your floors, who serve quietly without applause. A hush followed. Even the hum of the slowing rotors seemed to fade into silence. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came. For years, she had defined herself by control, by dominance. Yet in this moment, she had none. Daniel had stripped her of it without cruelty, without raising his voice, just by being more than she had ever imagined. The employees began to clap. It started with one, hesitant, then another, until the rooftop thundered with applause. Not for Victoria, for him. Their cheers lifted Daniel higher than any helicopter could. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement, then turned to leave. As he walked toward the stairwell, mop still propped against the wall where he had left it, his steps were steady, unhurried, the steps of a man who carried nothing to prove. Victoria's chest burned. She wanted to call out, to demand he stop, to salvage some shred of pride. But all she could do was watch him go, the truth settling over her like a shroud. She had mocked a man greater than she would ever be, and in doing so, she had revealed the hollowness of her own power. When the door closed behind him, the rooftop still rang with applause. But to Victoria, it sounded less like celebration and more like judgment, every clap echoing her failure. For the first time in her life, she felt small. And the image of Daniel, walking away without looking back, would haunt her long after the crowd's cheers faded.